In fact, Narby's theory does not exclude that causation might be caused also by plant chemistry, but he surely concludes that what is seen, what is perceived, is not parallel reality, but the reality contained in our own DNA and the superconscious memory surface that is connected to it. A perhaps more convincing evidence of causation being an effect of the shaman's own superconscious powers and not of plant chemistry is brought forward, or at least hypothesized, by the American medical anthropologist and psychologist Antonio Villoldo. In his book Shaman, Healer, Sage, Dr. Villoldo introduces in the third chapter entitled The Luminous Energy Field with an entry from his journals. Don Eduardo was one of the powerful Inca shamans Villoldo studied with for many years. I quote, "I found that the San Pedro potion does nothing other than make me sick. I am convinced that the altered state I am in is created by Don Eduardo's singing. And then there is the energy that he claims enters the ceremonial space when he summons the spirits of serpent, jaguar, hummingbird, and condor. What I can't explain is the fact that I am seeing energy. It only happens when I sit next to Don Eduardo. When I go more than a few feet away from him, I sense nothing. It's like he is surrounded by an electric space, where the air actually tingles. When I am inside his space, I see everything he sees." End of quote. The perhaps most convincing corroboration of my hypothesis comes from Theosophy and the pulpit of Charles Webster Leadbeater. If clairvoyant research is or is not considered as valid scientific research under the present reductionist science paradigm is not my problem. It may be a problem for those who, for reasons of psychological defense or emotional distortion, or else for reasons of professional reputation, adhere to a reductionist, limiting, exclusive, or even sectarian science paradigm as the ultimate hanger for their lacking emotional stability. From a point of view of real science, as methodologically sound, holistic, mentally sane, and intelligently communicated observation of nature, clairvoyance is science. In his book The Astral Plane, Leadbeater very much stresses the fact that we can hardly judge a human being by their acts only. In fact, as thoughts are much more important as an influence upon the world than most of us in the West know. When we go to praise somebody for his achievements and judge him or her a good person, we may be completely wrong, because that person may have exerted a ravaging influence on others and the world by his or her self-talk, by their way of thinking about others, and by their way of judging others harshly over years and years in their mind. What this creates are elementals or thought forms, and these thought forms are more or less permanent and gain permanence over time, and depending on the emotional energy we invest in these thoughts. And I think it's good that Leadbeater addresses this point so clearly, because most people in our culture are completely ignorant about the impact of thought on the world, on others, and on their own karma. Leadbeater writes, I quote, "The fact that we are so readily able to influence the elemental kingdoms at once shows us that we have a responsibility towards them for the manner in which we use that influence. Indeed, when we consider the conditions under which they exist, it is obvious that the effect produced upon them by the thoughts and desires of all intelligent creatures inhabiting the same world with them must have been calculated upon in the scheme of our system as a factor in their evolution. In spite of the consistent teaching of all the great religions, the mass of mankind is still utterly regardless of its responsibility on the thought plane. If a man can flatter himself that his words and deeds have been harmless to others, he believes that he has done all that can be required of him, quite oblivious of the fact that he may for years have been exercising a narrowing and debasing influence on the minds of those about him and filling surrounding space with the unlovely creations of a sordid mind. End of quote. Now, regarding the elementals that are created through thought and intent, and the gestation that is brought about by the repeated fostering of a well-defined thought pattern, Leadbeater explains that these elementals are not autonomous in the sense that they can begin to act on their own and trigger changes. They must be pushed to do so. I quote, "But the elemental must never be thought of as itself a prime mover. It is simply a latent force which needs an external power to set it in motion. It may be noted that although all classes of the essence have the power of reflecting images from the astral light as described above, there are varieties which receive certain impressions much more readily than others, which have, as it were, favorite forms of their own, into which, upon disturbance, they would naturally flow unless absolutely forced into some other, and such shapes tend to be a trifle less evanescent than usual." End of quote.